Welcome back to part 2 of how to win in multiple offer situations. As always, take a second to like and subscribe. Let's get right into it. Moving on, and this is another one too that I think is interesting in today's market, especially if you're working with a first-time home buyer and their parent insists on being at all of the negotiations and inspections and stuff, is contributing to closing costs. Because when our parents bought, the market was a little bit different. It was almost a given that you were going to get some buyer closing costs paid for by the seller. It was almost a given. They're like, I feel like older people are expecting, oh, well, we're going to get 3% in closing costs from the sellers, aren't we? It is very rare. Right. Unless you find a property that's been sitting for a while and you go over list and then ask for it back in seller paid closing costs, it's very rare that you're going to get it. And the reason I bring it up in this is we've had situations, and not so much in this market, it's a little bit less, but I mean last year when it was really busy, I had a couple win because we contributed to the seller's closing costs.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's another way to, you could wrap that into the purchase price or do that. Either way, it affects that bottom line, which is huge. But yeah, parents, that's tough. It's like, this isn't the Oregon Trail anymore. You can't give them a wheelbarrow full of radishes and, sack of sunflower seeds and expect them, to get your offer accepted. Sorry, mom and dad. We love you. But the market is different. And that being said, there are plenty of parents that I work with that they really are kind of key decision makers in the process. That are maybe helping contribute financially, or their children, who are typically first-time home buyers, they really value their opinion. And so the way I look at it is, are they realistic? Mm-hmm. If they're actually decision makers, are they realistic? And I'm treating them the same way I'm treating my clients. And it's the same way. Yeah, it's the same thing with any client. If your client says, "Hey, I want $150,000 single-family home in Maple Grove," I'm not going to say, "Okay, I'm going to set you up on a search and we'll see what we find." There's nothing.
Sometimes I do.
That.
Sometimes I do, and then they're like, "Well, nothing came up," or like this one rundown shack came up. I'm like, "Whoa, that's." But reality check, it's like that because that's what you're going to get at that price.
Right. It's setting those It goes back to setting those expectations and having those conversations. And if mom and dad are part of the process, you better be having that conversation with them, because there's a ton of agents that will let mom and dad run them ragged and say, "Oh, this house should be worth $85,000. This townhome is $215. I can't believe it appreciated that much over 30 years. That's crazy." It's like, the only thing that matters is, are they realistic? And it's your job to educate them if they're actually buyers in the process as well. And so you need to sit down with them. You need to talk with them. You need to talk to your clients too and say, "Hey, I love that you value your parents' opinions and you want them to be part of this process. But if they are, then they're the same as you. You guys are both buying this house. And so they need to be there for every showing. And we all need to be on the same page as to what we're offering and what the market conditions are." And if, like I said, whether parents are involved or not, there are some clients or consumers that just their expectations are not realistic, and they're not in line with the market. And as much as I'd love to help every buyer find a smoking deal for $100,000 less in a certain submarket, it's not realistic, and you can't work with everybody and you can't help everybody. And all you can do is give them their options, educate them the best you can, and go from there. And like I said, if they're willing to play ball, great. If they're not, sorry, I'm not the guy to help you.
And if those amazing deals existed, I would just buy them. So I would own them already.
They'd be gone.
Yeah. So and that's why they don't exist, or else because everyone would do them.
Right.
So yeah, and we kind of talked about it too, being flexible with close date. I mean, that's a big one. I make sure is always part of my fact-finding call to the listing agent is like, what is your preferred closing date? Because a lot of times buyers can be somewhat flexible. Generally, they're a little bit more flexible than the sellers, especially if you're working with a first-time home buyer. Maybe they're moving from a rent situation or even living with their parents where there's not really a structure. Because if you can be flexible with their close date, that actually is maybe one of the biggest non-monetary things that helps, because it really, There could be like, we need to move on this day, or we're buying our new house, we need to be in it.
Yeah, and for a lot of sellers, it's a huge term, because in a market with low inventory, a big question for sellers is, how do I capitalize on this hot market and get top dollar for my house and still find the home that I want to buy?
Yeah.
Where am I going to go next? And so being able, once again, it goes back to having that conversation, is closing date important to you? Can we be flexible? Can my buyers, do they have the flexibility to accommodate your sellers to help get this deal done? It's just, once again, another term that can be really, really important. So you need to ask the question.
Yeah. And we talked about this one too a little bit, inspection. So inspection's a big one. And like you said, so for people who are unfamiliar, inspection contingency, it's generally, I'd say people usually write 5 to 7 days.
Yep.
Where it's after the purchase agreement is accepted, you have 5 to 7 days, whatever you and your realtor write down your purchase agreement, to hire someone to come through, do an inspection, and then see, smaller things, maybe ask for some things to be fixed, or if you decide it's too big of a repair job, that you're just going to walk away.
Yep.
And you can walk away during the inspection period and get your earnest money back, pretty much no questions asked.
Yep.
You can essentially pretty much walk away for any reason. You find an excuse. So
yep.
A lot of sellers, I'd say a lot of sellers are weary of this one. And it's usually, if I have 2 offers that are almost identical, if I'm the listing agent, and one of them has waived the inspection contingency, that's usually one you're going to go with, unfortunately, for the buyers, because every contingency that you have is an option for the buyer to walk away, which is, so with every contingency, increases the risk for a seller that a deal is going to fall through.
Yep.
So by eliminating that contingency, you are securing that more in the mind of the seller. So on the buy side, again, I never tell people not to do an inspection.
Right.
I always say, like, hey, when I buy a house, I do an inspection. So I had an inspection done on my place. Yeah, well, I had an inspection done on my place. And so, but again, I was the only offer on it. So I had an inspection done on my place. But I always say, I'm not telling you to waive your inspection. I would never tell you to do that. It's your right to have one. But I can tell you, for the same reasons I just said, all the contingency stuff, it will make your offer a lot stronger. So I'm educating you on that, giving you that option, not saying you have to exercise it, but it is an option.
Yeah, there's plenty of, I've had multiple times where I've said, we're competing against offers and my clients still want an inspection, and I'll call my inspector and say, hey, can you get in tomorrow? And we'll book the inspection for the next day. And we'll write in a 1-day inspection contingency period. We won't even wait for the report to come back. My clients will go meet the inspector at the property the following day. And I'm just telling the sellers, or the sellers and listing agent, that we really want the inspection done. It's really important to my sellers. They're not willing to waive it, but I can get my people in tomorrow, and we can have this thing pending by the end of the night, which can be a really good option for it. If your buyers are really not willing to waive that inspection,
and you have a good inspection partner that's like gonna be able to do it the next day, because they get pretty busy. But it was really funny last year during like the heat of the market. A lot of inspectors were offering, like, for a little bit of a discount, they would actually, you got a buyer who really liked the place, they would do the initial walkthrough with them, like the showing. They would come with on the showing and just do an unofficial pointing stuff out without doing an actual report. You're really just getting kind of the opinion of an inspector with you. Right. Which none of it was binding. They weren't writing anything up, but it was just an option that buyers had. I never actually did one of those, but
I hadn't either.
I knew some people that got offers accepted off that. But the other thing, and maybe a little bit of like an industry secret, I guess, but I think all agents know. So, another thing I've gotten offers accepted on is asking for only safety or hazardous issues that pop up. That doesn't really mean anything. It makes sellers feel better, but it really isn't that. It's still an inspection contingency. It's not really like binding. Sorry if that.
I was going to say, industry secret. Well, there's a few things like that where and you need to be conscious of it on the sell side too, where something can look great on paper, and it may not even be real. So let me give this example. There's been plenty of times where, as listing agents, we see somebody come in $100,000 over purchase price, and they offer a $60,000 appraisal gap coverage. And well, I never saw this on my end, but I've had business partners that have dealt with it. And guess what? Shocker, it doesn't appraise. And then bigger shocker, you didn't check their proof of funds and they don't have the gap to cover it. So now you're 3 weeks into your purchase agreement and you either go back to the market or you drop your purchase price significantly.
And you probably already bought a house and you need that money to close.
Which is incredibly sleight of hand, but who knows? Maybe the other agent
really
didn't know either. Maybe they were like, oh, they're willing to do this. That's great.
Doubt it.
Yeah. But same with an inspection contingency period. You need to be educating your sellers and letting them know, as long as there is a contingency period, everything is still on the table. It's still negotiable. There's been times where I've had somebody submit a pass fail and then they get the inspection report back and they're like, we really need this fixed. And that's okay. But because I set the right expectations with the sellers, it's like on paper, pass fail is great, but they have a contingency period. They could back out if they don't want to, if they decide to come back and ask us for something. So
and as the buyer's agent, you're probably wording it like, it failed, but we can make it pass if you fix it.
Exactly. Exactly. And so it all goes back to educating your clients on the buy side and the sell side and thinking through every single possible outcome.
And there's other verbiage like buyer is willing to assume up to $5,000 worth of repairs, blah, blah, blah. There are different things you can work. I mean, work with your agent on that, but there are different inspection verbiages.
Yeah.
But
and also going back to that a little bit too, the educating your clients piece, and obviously what we're talking about right now. But if you're going to do a pass fail in inspection, you better not be in your client's ear saying, oh, we can ask them for whatever we want. This just looks good on paper. You're a giant piece of garbage if you do that.
Yep.
And it's for sure falls under the umbrella of unethical.
Yeah, and it does suck when you've like expressed it to your client and then they come in like, I know you said this, but we really, and then you're like, we kind of have to now because I work for you, and then I'm on the phone to listen to like, hey, I know that we said this, and I really like.
But and so I mean that stuff happens sometimes too. But like we said, as soon as you really wrap up the initial negotiations, you are rowing in the same direction. And as a listing agent, if they say, hey, they really want the leaking pipe under the sink fixed. Mm-hmm. If I'm a seller or I'm a listing agent, I'm like, get the pipe fixed and let's move on. They came in $30,000 over ask. The other terms are great. I know they said they weren't going to ask for anything, or maybe whatever the term is. If it still makes sense to move forward with the deal, also don't be that agent that makes a huge fit about it. Always be that solution-driven agent and the reason you want to do that is for your clients. You're an advocate for your clients. Maybe it'll piss you off a little bit. Maybe you're not happy with the agent, how they dealt with something. But the only thing in my mind when I'm doing a deal is how can I continue to build rapport and repair this bridge if for some reason something did go wrong, and how can we get how can we get this deal to the finish line?
Yeah.
And obviously you want that to be as smooth as possible for every single deal, but in real estate that's just not the case.
Yeah.
So always be that solution-driven agent, and like we mentioned right at the beginning, 99% of the time there's a solution to be had.
Yeah.
So keep emotions out of it, be logical, and
and like I said,
that's how you get deals done.
Yeah.
And you don't have to go back and deal with multiple offers again.
Yeah. And when you're talking about like leaky pipes and stuff, that's something like I'll bring up to my buyers to maybe get fixed, just because you're probably not closing for like another 30 days. A leaky pipe, that could be doing more damage as it leaks. Yeah. So that's usually my main concern about a leaky pipe is like, well, for the sake of it's going to be leaking for another 30 days, can we get that fixed? And that was it's funny because
most people are pretty understanding.
Yeah,
about
that, it actually happened on a deal I had just like last month where it was in a bathroom that they never used. So it was like in a downstairs, and it was actively like dripping in the ceiling because there's a bathroom above it.
Yeah.
And we're like, hey, like we.
I know we're pending, but
Yeah, I was like,
what the hell's going on?
I was like, can we? I was like, you don't. And we even said like, we would like that. You don't even have to fix the ceiling. If you got to cut into it and like fix the plumbing, if you
funny.
leave the hole in the ceiling, that's fine. My buyers will repair that, but. Just because it is actively leaking, we would like it to be fixed so it doesn't do more damage.
Also, for the consumers out there, just so you know, it is in the purchase agreement that if the property isn't as in good condition or better condition than when you saw it initially or the last time you saw it, you have a right to delay closing and demand repairs or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so that
don't
was
be
like,
scared of that.
And that was super cool seller, super nice agent. Yeah. They actually did the whole thing and fixed the ceiling, but so it wasn't that big of a deal. So this is another one that usually is a pretty big one, and unfortunately a lot of times there's nothing you can really do about it if you're a buyer. But if you have a property to sell, if your offer is going to be contingent on the sale of your property, that's one as a listing agent I'm probably straying away from a little bit. And I know it seems probably counterproductive just because it's like, oh, well, you said it's such a busy market. There's house should sell. It should, and it probably will. The only issue is, as you find out in real estate, literally anything can happen between the time they sign a deal and the time it closes. Yeah. Because this happened with one of my buyers, great clients I had, very good clients I had from New Jersey that were moving here. So we did everything virtually pretty much. We got their offer accepted, and it was contingent on the sale of their home, which they had a great offer already in hand. It was great. The week of close, the buyers just ghosted them. Could not get a hold. And then it's an attorney state out there. They don't have closers.
Right.
So then it became a legal issue, and it drug out for like 2 weeks. And it was like, then we were starting to pay, I think by the end we were paying like per day to the seller or else they were going to cancel.
Right.
Because I got them to accept our offer over another one. So they were already pissed that they could have already closed.
Yep.
So we were paying a per diem per day until we could actually close, and it got dragged out like 2 weeks, and it was at no fault of the buyers, and it seemed like a rock solid because obviously like I asked for a copy of that purchase agreement, like seems solid, but you can't force someone to close on a house if they don't want to. I mean, obviously you can bring them to court, you can sue them for breach of contract, but that doesn't mean
performance. You can force them.
Yeah, but it's like
but that takes 6 months, 12 months, 18 months.
Exactly. So
with the legal process, right?
So I've been on that side where it's like, well, why wouldn't they accept our offer? Like, we have an accepted offer. Like, our house is going to sell. It's like, it should in theory, yes, but anything can happen. So if we're up against another offer where they don't have a house to sell, it just is. It's stronger. It just is.
It's based on the current. It falls back under that umbrella of current market conditions. Sellers have options right now. Yeah. They don't need to accept your contingent offer because if they're priced correctly, they're going to get a different offer that is non-contingent. And then it's a small sidebar here is if you do have a property or if you are a buyer and your offer is going to be contingent upon the sale of your property, make sure you are checking with your agent and your finance person and going through every single possible financing option to see if you can remove that somehow. There are programs, they cost a little bit of money, but like I said, sidebar, we don't need to talk about that. But
no, I was gonna bring that up.
Right. So. I mean, yeah. So I mean, it can cost. There are certain programs where you pay 1% and they'll buy cash, and then you basically take over the deed from them and then pay them back with your proceeds after you sell your house. And so if you're paying, if in a market where you're already usually paying over asking, 1% is marginal. Yeah. And especially if you're on the sell side too, and you think you're priced correctly and you know you're going to get a good price for your house, it can be a fantastic option for you. But you need to check every single avenue to put yourself in the best position possible to be successful, because sellers have options. They don't need to accept your offer. And as much as I would love to say, we can get your offer accepted, we just got to do a different term. You're right. The more moving parts that you have in a transaction, the less appealing it is.
And that's why this one is so big, because it's the one thing that's like out of your control.
Right.
Whether you close on your house is really not even up to you. If something messes up on that buyer side, that was out of your control.
I mean, it can cause a huge change. So the sellers accept an offer that's contingent upon the sale of the buyer's property. And so now they've accepted an offer where the buyers need to sell their property. They need to obtain financing. And then they're also relying on that buyer to first of all buy the property and then have them obtain financing. And we've seen that chain go on and on. It's the same thing. And it's one seller relying on 6 or 7 parties to hopefully close on a certain date, and hopefully nothing goes wrong. And I would say it is rare that you run into situations like you did with people backing out all the way, but it 100% does happen more often than you would think. It's very rare, but it does happen.
It's rare, but it's always the one time where you convince, like, it should be fine. Like, it'll be fine. And then it happens. You're like,
I know.
God damn it. Now I have to tell them that it did happen.
Yep.
And they're going to be like, I thought you said. And that's why I don't speak in definites very often. I just try and say, in my experience, this is what I have seen.
Yep.
But I do say, literally anything can happen. And that's why I do get excited for them at every stage, but I kind of hold back the big congrats until that money is funded to that seller's account. I don't know. Anything could happen because I've seen a lot of stuff happen.
Oh yeah, it's keeping a close pulse on things and making sure that your loan partner and your title company and all the other parties involved are doing their jobs. And once again, setting expectations with your clients, saying, "Hey, congrats, we got our offer accepted. That's huge. Next step is appraisal. Congrats, we're
take your
through
foot off the
inspection.
pedal.
This is great. Continue to stay in touch with your lender. We're on the same page as them. Next big step is appraisal. So let's hold our breath until we get that back, and then it should be smooth sailing from there. And then it's resetting those expectations, and then it's bringing them a closing gift and saying congrats once the ink's dry. Right?
Yeah, and that's where buyers are always asking me, like, well, what's next? What's the next stage? And I go, the biggest thing for you is if at any point your lender asks you for something, you get it to them as soon as possible.
I know.
Get them the whole thing and don't lie about anything.
Right.
And do not buy a new car to celebrate. Do not start putting furniture on a credit card. Don't open new credit cards. Do not take out new credit.
Yep.
I mean, that's
if you buy anything other than groceries, call your lender and say, is this okay if I purchase this?
Yeah. And so moving on too. So this is one that I've never used personally, but getting creative with proration of taxes, just because there is a section on the purchase agreement where you essentially normally you just say, buyer and seller are going to prorate from the day of close. So the seller will pay all the taxes up to that close date. Buyer will pay the rest. That could be a tactic, though, where your buyer's willing to pay the year of taxes, saves the seller some money on taxes, special assessments that might be on the taxes.
Where we typically see it, right?
Yep.
But yeah, you're right. Saving money with those special assessments while saving the seller's money by saying, hey, we'll assume this assessment is a great way. Well, let me go back up a little bit. So your buyer assuming that assessment, or like we said, getting creative with the proration of taxes and covering some of that gap for them, those can be great options to put more money back in the seller's pocket if you are unsure that the property might not appraise or something like that. If you're like, hey, I ran numbers and this thing the market is not showing me that it'll appraise at what we got it for, but we write in those terms, that's just another way to essentially bump up our offer price without having the sellers get scared of that appraisal.
Yeah.
Too, right? Because it's all, at the end of the day, for the sellers, it's coming right out of that'll come right down to their bottom line. And the more proceeds that you can give them, the more appealing your offer is. And usually for the buyers, it's broken up into monthly payments like the assessment is, or it's broken up over the year. So it's not a huge chunk of change that your buyers bring to the table. It's not like you say, hey, I'm going to cover this $12,000 assessment, and your buyer's got to come up with $12,000. But as soon as you cover that, it's wrapped into your monthly payment through property taxes, through your mortgage payment. It's all escrowed there. And then for the sellers, it is $12,000 right off the top that they saved.
Yep, exactly.
So it's thinking about that from both perspectives, and obviously doing anything you can to give yourself a leg up when you're competing against other offers. Right?
Yeah, especially if there's an assessment. We kind of touched on this too with closing date, having a delayed possession date or even a rent back.
Yeah.
I know that can be huge because sometimes sellers are like, we want some time to move out.
Yep.
Would you delay possession? So normally when you close, you're moving in the day of, or you take possession as soon as that signing happens. Sometimes they'll ask for a delayed possession. They're like, hey, can you give us 2 weeks from close to move out? Or could we do a rent back? Like, hey, we'll pay you $300 a week to stay for the 2 weeks. And this is one I don't generally encourage because it can get messy, especially depending on what state you live in with squatters' rights and stuff. Because I know in California they had huge issues with this because people would sell the house. And essentially during COVID in California, especially, you could not get evicted from your home for any, or like a building for any reason. So there would be people that would sell their houses. And I saw one story that it was like a year and a half later and they could not get the seller out of the house. But essentially, like the cops were like, we can't do anything about it.
Right. Because that makes sense because it was probably a rent back and which is technically a signed lease. And if you're renting to somebody, as we both know, owning multifamily properties, there are very strict guidelines and stipulations around evicting a tenant. And during COVID, you're right, it was damn near impossible.
Yeah, and most states are very tenant friendly, right. And that falls into that. So again, this isn't what I normally recommend. Right. Sometimes if the sellers really want it, the buyers are fine with it, but I will say this, when you do it, make sure you have like a separate lease written up. Yep. Like you want almost like a rental agreement lease written up separate from the contract because now they are a tenant.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I typically stay away from it. And usually this is a term that I think most consumers on the sell side or buy side, I think there's already this preconceived notion that it's not even an option. You sell your house and you have to move on the closing date. Yeah. And you buy the house and you have to move in on the closing date. Most people don't know it's an option. Usually when we see this, it comes up a little later and they're like, hey, they're really having trouble moving their shit out of the house. And
they didn't get movers in time, and now the movers can't get there till a couple days after.
Whatever it may be. And I don't love it. And if we can avoid it, that's the route I typically recommend to my clients. And what I'm mostly worried about, it's not them never moving out. It's them
damaging the house.
Them damaging the property after you've already closed. Because you're right, as soon as
you no longer have rights to.
As soon as you signed it, it's your property. And if you don't have the specific language or the specific lease agreement in place to coincide with that term, it can get ugly.
Before I do a delayed possession or rent back, I definitely explore the option of let's push the closing date back then.
Right. I agree too. Yep. That's 100% what I do. If we can avoid it, first thing that I'm asking is let's push this closing date.
Yeah. We talked about appraisal gap. Another big one that I want to talk about is kind of controversial is escalation clauses.
Sure.
And again, I've had my issues with escalation clauses. And from the very beginning, I've said it's an option that I do not love.
Yep.
But people use them, and sometimes it works, and you win. So for those that don't know, an escalation clause is saying our offer, it's listed at $400. Our offer is $410, but we're willing to go up to $450 and beat any competing offer by X amount, like $1,000. So you're saying that if they get an offer at $448, you're willing to go up to that. You're willing to beat that offer. So, but in exchange, they have to show you the front page of a legitimate purchase agreement from that offer. Now, the issue with that is it's not binding for the seller to use that just because you put it in. So they could say they got an offer at $448. That doesn't mean they have to use yours. Now they know what your highest offer could be. They know what you're willing to go up to. They could come back and say, hey, my sellers aren't entertaining escalation clauses. They want highest and best written out with no escalation clauses. That could also mean that they didn't have an offer that beat yours. That's happened to me, and they don't have to disclose that. They don't have to disclose that. They know now what your higher.
Yeah, they haven't signed your purchase agreement, so the term you wrote in is something that you are offering the seller. But you're right; they can come back and say, "Just submit your highest and best offer," and they know that they don't.
So yeah, in the scenario that I just made up, you might have offered at 410. Someone else offered at 405, but your escalation was up to 450. And then they come back to both parties and say, hey, both good offers, but my sellers don't really want to mess with escalation clauses. Just give us your highest and best.
Yep.
So you're thinking, well, I don't want to lose this house. We got to go up to 450, and the other person stays at 405.
Yep.
Well, now they knew your hand. And so ethically, yes, it would be best if they, stuck to that. And I think it's a pretty big bluff on the seller's agent side because
it can be, and you're right. I think it's rare that listing agents do.
Yes, and that is a rare scenario.
But it does happen.
Yeah.
For me, I haven't used it in years, and the reason being is because I'm usually doing enough legwork and having the conversation with the listing agent to know where our offer is going to fall and to know what we need to offer to secure the property.
Yep.
And then it's up to my buyers, of course, to decide whether or not they want to come up to that number.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of agents use escalation clauses when they're not having that conversation. They're like, well, how high do you want to come up? And it's appealing to buyers because they're like, hey, maybe we'll get this offer accepted at 725. But yeah, we come up to 750. If they provide, if they want to exercise our escalation clause, it's just that dangling that carrot for them thinking, oh, maybe we can get it for a lower price. But if you're having the conversations and doing enough legwork and talking to the listing agent, and escalation clauses can be really appealing to buyers because it dangles that carrot out in front of them that they might have a shot at getting their offer accepted at a lower price than what they would really be willing to pay. And maybe that's a quick sidebar too, to maybe talk about everything we just talked about here. Is all of these terms are so important in a multiple offer situation, right? But if there is any opportunity as a consumer to negotiate the price down or have the terms accommodate the buyer a little bit more than the seller, we're of course 100% going to do that. And there are cases where we see it all the time where properties are listed 5 to 8% too high, and we get to negotiate that price back down to reality, and we get to have a longer inspection contingency period. So as a consumer, just know if there is an opportunity to negotiate the price down or give yourself some extra buffer on the terms, well, I know that we are, of course, doing that.
Yeah.
And make sure your agent is too, because it is easy to get caught up in a market where you just lost out 3 times, and then you go see a property that's been on the market 14 days and say, I'll pay 10 grand over asking to wrap this up, which is great. If you want to do it, go for it. But if there's room to negotiate that price down and give yourself a better deal, once again, just make sure you know your options.
Yeah, and
it's going to be property dependent.
Yeah, and it's location. It's so location based. I mean, here in Minnesota, it's like a lot of neighborhoods, stuff doesn't last more than a weekend. Other neighborhoods, especially if you're looking for a condo in the city of Minneapolis or St. Paul, right now is a great time to buy because no one wants them. So
go look at a dozen.
Yeah, so they're sitting for a while. I got a buddy. I've got a buddy who's looking, and we're kind of shopping around, and it's been nice for him because he's moving a little bit slower with the process, but we're looking at condos that have been sitting for a while. So
yeah, and most do, and I mean, in the condo market, that's totally different than the single-family townhome market, and you can be priced correctly as a condo and sit for 60 days before you get an offer.
Exactly, and that's also it's work with an agent who knows what the marketplace is doing.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, but other than that, I mean, we covered a lot. Can you think of anything else?
I don't know, man. I don't think so. I think we covered a lot.
Yeah. Again, I think falls back on communication. Make sure you have a good agent that knows the market, and they should be able to kind of push in the right direction.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're a consumer, make sure you're talking to your agent about all of your options with every term of the purchase agreement. Know that it's going to be property dependent. You can come in 10 grand over asking on one property and get it accepted, and on another, come in 30 grand over asking and not get it. So just make sure that you're having that conversation with your agent every offer you make. And then as an agent, make sure you're picking up the phone. Make sure you're having those conversations with the listing agent to figure out what you need to do to secure the property for your buyers. Not only because you should just do it, because that's what a good agent would do.
It's your job.
Save yourself some time.
Yeah.
You instead of submitting 6 or 7 blind offers, do the work, pick up the phone, and put your buyers in a successful position and get your offer accepted.
Yeah.
Give yourself the best chance you can to get it accepted.
Exactly. All right. This has been fun. Thanks for coming back on, Ian.
No problem, man. Happy
Sure
to
won't
be here.
be the last time.
Yeah. All right. See you, man.